everyone, it's Sevy. Judge Xueyi is out and ready to subdue and break enemies with her badass moves. She's come with a rather unique skill set, so to help you get the most of it, this guide will cover her traces, Eidolons, Relic and Light Cone builds, teams, and more. Let's begin. Xueyi is a 4-star Quantum Destruction unit with an interesting and strong hybrid kit that combines the potential of break effect and traditional attack crit scaling damage. Her playstyle focuses on maximizing toughness damage, dealing powerful quantum breaks, and outputting strong raw damage. Let's review her kit to see how all these aspects work together. Xueyi's skill deals a blast attack of quantum damage, and the center target receives more health and toughness damage than adjacent targets. The importance of dealing toughness damage, especially to multiple enemies, will become clear soon. Then, casting her ultimate targets one enemy to deal a big instance of quantum damage and toughness damage. What's special about it is that it reduces toughness regardless if the enemy is weak to quantum or not, which makes her more capable of breaking even non-weak enemies if needed. Her ultimate also gets a damage increase based on how much toughness is reduced on the target. One reason why dealing toughness damage is fundamental to Xueyi's kit is due to her talent's follow-up mechanics. Whenever Xueyi or an ally reduces the enemy's toughness, she gains karma stacks, which you can track on her character HUD, but Xueyi's own attacks and ally attacks give different stack amounts. With Xueyi, for every 1 toughness unit, or the equivalent of a basic attack's toughness damage, Xueyi gains 1 stack. For example, in this scenario, Xueyi's skill will reduce 2 toughness units on the center enemy and 1 unit on adjacent enemies, totaling to 4 units. And as you can see, Xueyi indeed gained 4 stacks. As for her ultimate, it reduces 4 units on a single target, so you can see she also gains 4 stacks. It's a different case when her allies deal toughness damage. Any ally attack that deals toughness damage will only give 1 stack, no matter how much toughness was reduced, and even if multiple enemies got reduced. Nevertheless, her allies' combined attacks still help with her karma stacks, but it'll obviously stack faster with Xueyi's own attacks. When this reaches 8 stacks, Xueyi then triggers a follow-up attack that deals 3 random hits of quantum damage, though note that these attacks will not add karma stacks. By continuously damaging enemy toughness, whether through Xueyi's own attacks or her allies, her gameplay loop will mainly consist of cycling through her skill and ultimate attacks, then triggering follow-up attacks. Xueyi feels noticeably better when fighting multiple quantum weak enemies, largely owing to her blast skill being able to accumulate karma stacks faster and trigger follow-up attacks more frequently. Through this playstyle, Xueyi will also want to trigger quantum breaks on enemies, which is another significant damage source. If you're unfamiliar with it, we'll quickly break down its mechanics in a while. As for Xueyi's technique, using it makes her initiate battle and deal quantum damage to all enemies. It's pretty simple, but what's nice is that any toughness damage dealt this way still counts towards her karma stacks. That gives you a good head start, especially when facing multiple quantum weak enemies. Now let's take a look at her Ascension and bonus traces, which contains one of the most important aspects of her kit. That's her Ascension 2 ability, wherein her break effect percent is also converted into damage percent bonus for her in a 1:1 ratio, and this maxes at 240%. That's a crazy passive effect that has very significant impacts on your build and stat goals. To start, it highly incentivizes building her with break effect because it lets you double dip into boosting both her quantum breaks and raw damage. This lets her lean into a hybrid DPS kit that draws damage from her skill and ult quantum attacks and breaks. It also means that Xueyi naturally gains so much damage percent bonus, which can make balancing her stats a bit trickier or easier depending how you look at it. Anyway, we'll discuss this more in the build section. For Ascension 4, Xueyi's ultimate deals 10% more damage when attacking enemies that have half or more of their toughness bar. It's a small but nice bonus, but no need to force it every time, especially if you're trying to use her ultimate to time a quantum break. And for Ascension 6, if she exceeds her 8 karma stack limit, she reserves up to 6 excess stacks and recovers them after she does her follow-up attack, which is pretty great as it helps ensure they don't go to waste, thereby helping her trigger follow-up attacks more frequently. For her stat bonus traces, she unlocks a mix of HP, break effect, and quantum damage. Since we've established how well suited Xueyi's kit is to inflicting breaks and why she naturally wants to stack break effect stats too, let's quickly review how quantum breaks work and why they have strong potential. Inflicting a quantum break on an enemy first deals an initial quantum break damage, which mainly scales on your unit's level, their break effect stat, and the enemy's toughness amount. Then it applies the entanglement debuff, which significantly delays the enemy's next turn and has a stacking mechanic. During their entangled status, if any ally attacks them, they will get an additional entanglement stack, which maxes at at 5 stacks. When the enemy tries to recover from the quantum break, they will receive an extra instance of quantum break damage. It also scales on the same factors, but this damage gets multiplied based on how many stacks there are. As such, Xueyi can deal a lot of break damage this way, and even if the enemy doesn't have a quantum weakness, remember that her ultimate can force a quantum break since it'll reduce the enemy toughness regardless of their weaknesses. All in all, I think Xueyi's kit is one of the more interesting ones we have. She really tries to take advantage of Quantum's strong breaking potential by building break effect and having a talent that wants you to reduce enemy toughness, while also having the conventional DPS elements of scaling on crit and attack. When you combine these two aspects, they can yield pretty impressive damage for a 4-star DPS, and these sick-looking animations definitely do her justice as well. At E0, her damage is already quite good and serves as a solid foundation for her Eidolons to improve her damage capabilities. Let's see what they add. E1 makes her talent's follow-up attack deal 40% more damage, a great boost. Then E2 further improves her follow-up attack by making it now deal toughness damage regardless of the enemy's weakness type. Additionally, it also lets Xueyi restore some HP, which is okay for added survivability. E3 increases her skill and basic trace levels. E4 is a very impactful one, as using her ult now gives her a 40% break effect buff for 2 turns, further boosting her break potency and also equating to basically a 40% damage bonus increase from her A2 passive. It also results in an easier time with building and balancing her stats. E5 increases her talent and ult levels. And finally, E6 makes her decrease the karma stacks needed to trigger her talent, now just making it require 6 stacks. This helps her potentially trigger more follow-up attacks in a battle to boost her overall damage output. Consider as well that it builds upon her E1 and E2's effects, making them and this gain more synergy and value. As always, be careful of trying to pull for 4-star copies if you don't want to risk getting the limited 5-star on the banner. Now let's move on to her relic build, starting with her stat preferences. For the body piece, go for either crit rate or crit damage, depending on what gives you a good ratio. Aim for around 50 to 60% crit rate and 100% crit damage. If you can get higher, then that's better. For her feat piece, speed is generally recommended for fast turn cycling, but attack is also fine, especially if compensated with other speed sources or advanced effects. For her rope, go for break effect. This has a double purpose of strengthening her breaks while acting as a damage percent source to boost her raw quantum damage. For her Planar Sphere, it's one of those cases where attack has an apparent advantage over quantum damage boost. She already oversaturates on so many damage percent sources from her break effect conversion, traces, and Eidolons that attack now has a lot of value on her. However, if you happen to have a really good quantum damage sphere, then you can still use that, of course. As for her substats, you're mainly looking for break effect, crit, attack, and speed. Get as much speed as you need to hit your desired breakpoint or target. Now for her relic sets. For full set combos, go for either the 4-piece Genius of Brilliant Stars or 4-piece Thief of Shooting Meteor sets. The 4-piece Genius gives a quantum damage bonus, but more importantly, its defense ignore is potent when up against quantum weak enemies, which is where you'll be using her for the most part, and it applies to both her raw damage and break damage, and defense ignore or reduction effects get more value when stacked. Meanwhile, the 4-piece Thief gives a total of 32% break effect, which again also converts to a 32% damage bonus. There's also a small energy gain upon breaking an enemy, though most times it won't have any noticeable impact on her rotation. Otherwise, you can go for 2-piece set combos of break effect, attack, speed, or quantum damage. These give more flexibility in choosing pieces with the right main stats and great substats. As for her planar ornaments, there are 4 options. The Talia Kingdom of Banditry set has high potential, especially if you hit the 145 speed requirement, which will likely need external buffs, so at full power, it gives up to 36% break effect. However, its world is generally not as efficient to farm since the Talia and Sprightly Von Whack are a bit more niche options, so just be mindful if you have units who can make good use of its drops. It's also not a huge difference compared to the alternatives, which are the Space Sealing Station, Firmament Frontline, Glamoth, and Inert Salsoto sets. All 3 have very marginal differences that can vary on buffs and stats that she gets, so farm whichever has the most efficient world for your needs and ensure you can hit their secondary requirements. The Space Sealing Station and Glamoth sets are particularly very efficient worlds to farm in since those sets and their accompanying support sets are usable by so many units. Moving on, let's review her recommended light cone options. Your default and generally top option is On the Fall of an Aeon, which you can simply purchase and max superimpose from her to store, making it very accessible accessible for all players. It's got high base stats, a huge stacking attack buff, and a damage bonus buff after breaking an enemy. It'll take a few attacks to ramp up, and assuming you can break consistently enough, which Xueyi can do very well, then you'll be able to maximize its full damage potential. But either way, its high base stats and attack buff are already very good by themselves. Really, the biggest drawback of this light cone is that you might be stealing it from another destruction DPS that also wants it. But if Xueyi can hold it, then no need to look for alternatives. Under the Blue Sky is a very good 4-star option which features the little Xueyi and Hanya's sisters. It gives a permanent attack buff and a conditional crit rate bonus upon defeating an enemy. The crit rate buff will need her to defeat an enemy, so be mindful of triggering it to get the most out of its potential. It's also preferably at high superimpositions to be close to Aeon's potential. Something irreplaceable is the standard banner 5-star light cone, but at S1 it has lower damage potential versus a max superimposed fall of an Aeon. The damage bonus buff also requires getting hit or defeating an enemy and only lasts 1 turn, which is more suited for Clara, so it can be pretty inconsistent on Xueyi. The Mole's Welcome You is still pretty viable for being a huge attack stat stick, especially with superimpositions. You'll just need to use a basic attack once to get the full buff. Nowhere to Run can also work, but it's not really worth getting as a Battle Pass light cone, especially when the fall of an Aeon is already free and other competitive gacha options exist. If you have limited 5-star destruction light cones, you can still use them as general stat sticks thanks to their high base stats and crit bonuses, but their passives won't necessarily be well suited to her kit. Moving on to Xueyi's team considerations. First of all, having the right elemental counters versus enemies will help achieve her ideal potential. This means being up against quantum weak enemies and having teammates that will counter enemy weaknesses, as those factors will help Xueyi trigger follow-ups more easily. The typical template is to run her in a hypercarry template, which consists of having a combo of 2 harmony and or nihility supports that will help buff Xueyi's damage and a survival support to keep your team healthy. However, dual carry templates are still definitely possible and can perform well enough if tailored to the combat scenario. For instance, comping her with follow-up attack allies like Clara or Topaz, since their follow-ups also help expedite Xueyi's karma stacking. Units that have built-in turn advance effects like Zila and Sushang, who can get into consecutive turns in a short amount of time, can also speed up her karma stacking. And since Xueyi's entanglement can delay enemies for quite a while, the other DPS can spend their DPS window attacking that broken enemy and taking advantage of the increased broken damage multiplier. In any case, you'll have to be mindful with timing your attacks if you want to ensure that Xueyi will deal the breaking hit. If she fails to break reliably and consistently, then you're losing out on the huge potential damage of her entanglement break damage. Anyway, for harmony supports, the roster has very good picks. Aside from the usual damage bonus, attack, and crit buffs, they provide their own unique utilities, like Bronya for turn advancing, Tingyun's energy battery, Hanya's SP generation, and so on. If Xueyi also needs a lot more speed to hit breakpoints, we have supports like Asta and Hanya who can give a huge speed buff. A combo that does have notable interactions is Xueyi and Run Mei, and there are some trade-offs you'll want to note when they're paired up. To start, there are of course notable pros. Her damage bonus, resistance penetration, speed are obviously all useful for Xueyi, but her unique break efficiency buff can help Xueyi gain karma stacks faster to front-load her damage sooner and break faster as well. Run Mei's break effect buff helps Xueyi's quantum break potency and raw damage too, but you might also notice that keeping the enemies broken for longer with Run Mei's delay effect means that it'll also take longer for Xueyi to inflict a quantum break and reapply it. You also won't be able to deal toughness damage again as soon as possible to restack Xueyi's karma again. But at the end of the day, if the enemies die quickly enough, then this might not be that noticeable anyway. Despite the potential cons, I still find myself pairing them frequently as Run Mei's advantages are still significant and produce good results nonetheless. And if you're running a dual carry comp, then Run Mei's team-wide buffs can have more value. As for Xueyi's nihility supports, Silverwolf has amazing synergy with Xueyi. She inflicts a lot of single target debuffs to boost Xueyi's damage, but more importantly, she can force a quantum weakness on enemies, which then makes it possible for Xueyi to more easily break them. Silverwolf's ult does a lot of toughness damage though, so if you want Xueyi to break, be careful about timing their attacks. She can also help better enable a mono quantum team if you have the teammates for it. Pele's still a good choice of course, as her defense shred targets all enemies, she's an effective skill point generator, and can remove certain enemy buffs if needed. Then you'll need to keep your team alive with survival supports. All available options can technically work to varying degrees of comfort, but you can expect 5 stars to generally provide a more comfortable experience. Some also offer other support utilities aside from survivability, like Fu Xuan's crit rate buff, Huohuo's energy regen, and so on. Some survival supports also have more offensive abilities, so using them against the correct weakness helps nicely with stacking Xueyi's karma, like Luocha and Fu Xuan's ult or March's counterattacks. For her auto-battle behavior, she seems to behave like a regular DPS, and since managing toughness damage for her karma stacks is also important, that's one major aspect I looked out for. She generally spams her skill, though there are a few outliers where she uses a basic attack even with some SP left. Maybe because the AI has other conditions where it would rather allocate SP to other teammates. For targeting priority, it seems her skill will try to attack a target where she can deal the most toughness damage. Like in a case where the boss isn't weak to Quantum but smaller enemies are, she seems to target those weak enemies. But if the boss and its adjacent enemies are weak to Quantum, then she'd prioritize the boss. As for her ult, she casts it right away as expected of most DPS units. For its target, my general observation is that it will also try to prioritize whoever it can deal the most toughness damage to, which again is usually a boss enemy. But an exception seems to be is if there is a smaller enemy that she can very likely kill with it, she seems to target that instead. Perhaps the most underutilized aspect of her auto battle is her quantum breaking potential. The AI will not have the nuanced understanding of timing breaks the way you can. We can implement more strategic delaying and prioritizing of certain attacks to line up a break that can result in better overall damage, but the AI's breaking management does not seem to really consider that aspect. Sometimes the stars align where she ends up breaking the enemy and the allies will attack it to stack the entanglement damage, but that seems more like a nice coincidence than a deliberate attempt, at least from what I can see. As always, there may be other conditions or scenarios where her auto behavior is different, but overall, she works perfectly fine up to medium difficulty content, and even somewhat harder content can still be done in auto if you have a synergistic and well-invested team that also has the right elemental counters to help with her karma stacking. In turn-limited content though, since her breaking won't be as effectively utilized, it's no surprise that battles last noticeably longer. And that's it for the Xueyi guide. Let me know what you think of her and what teams you've tried and liked or plan to use with her. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!